The scent hit Eleanor first. Jasmine and bergamot, foreign and intimate, clinging to the air of her own salon like a confession. She froze in the doorway, her breath catching as the scene assembled itself with cruel clarity. Sebastian, her husband of 7 years, standing too close to Lady Vivian Hale, his hand on her arm, their voices low and urgent. Neither had heard her enter. For one suspended moment, Eleanor could have retreated, could have pretended she'd seen nothing. Instead, she stepped forward, her heels sharp against the marble, and watched her husband's face drain of color. No explanation followed, just silence, heavy, guilty, damning. And in that silence, every unanswered question of the past year suddenly had its answer. Before we continue, if you're watching from London, New York, Paris, or anywhere in between, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay with me until the end, because what Eleanor discovers will turn everything you think you know upside down. The invitation had been Sebastian's idea. Come by the salon around 4, he'd said that morning over coffee, his tone casual, almost distracted. I'll have Jensen bring the car around. We can ride home together. Eleanor had agreed without much thought. It wasn't unusual. Sebastian often worked late at the gentleman's club he'd inherited from his father, and the salon, an upscale establishment 3 streets over that Eleanor managed, closed at 5. The timing made sense. What didn't make sense was the jasmine. Eleanor stood motionless in the arched entryway, her hand still resting on the brass door handle. The salon's main floor stretched before her, polished wood, velvet chairs, gilded mirrors reflecting the late afternoon light. Empty, except for 2 figures near the far window. Sebastian wore the navy suit she'd helped him choose last month. Vivian Hale wore cream silk and desperation. Eleanor's first instinct wasn't rage, it was observation. A habit formed from years of running a business where details mattered. The angle of a chair, the expression on a client's face, the unspoken tension in a room. Vivian wasn't smiling. Sebastian wasn't either. His hand rested on Vivian's forearm, not possessively, but firmly, as if steadying her, as if keeping her upright. Vivian's face was turned away, her shoulders curved inward, her free hand pressed flat against the window glass. They looked like 2 people sharing bad news, or hiding something worse. Eleanor's heel clicked once against the floor. Both heads turned. Sebastian's expression collapsed. Not into guilt exactly, but something close enough that Eleanor's stomach twisted. Vivian's eyes went wide, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came. Eleanor. Sebastian's voice cracked on her name. He stepped back from Vivian immediately, his hand dropping to his side. You're early. I'm exactly on time, Eleanor said. Her voice came out colder than she'd intended, but she didn't soften it. You said 4. It's 4. Vivian moved then, a jerky half-step toward the door, her hands fluttering uselessly. Mrs. Ashcroft, I'll go. I'm so sorry. Stay, Eleanor said. Vivian stopped. Eleanor stepped fully into the room, letting the door swing shut behind her with a soft, final click. She set her gloves on the nearest table, one at a time, smoothing the leather with deliberate care. When she looked up, Sebastian was staring at her like a man watching a structure collapse in slow motion. Would someone, Eleanor said quietly, like to tell me what's happening? Silence. Vivian looked at Sebastian. Sebastian looked at the floor. Eleanor felt something sharp and unfamiliar lodge itself beneath her ribs. Not betrayal yet. Betrayal required confirmation. This was the moment before. The breath before the blow. Sebastian. He flinched. Actually flinched. Sebastian Ashcroft, who had faced down creditors and competitors and his own father's debts without blinking, flinched at his wife's voice. It's not, he started, then stopped. This isn't what? Eleanor's tone didn't rise. She'd learned early that volume wasn't necessary for force. Isn't what it looks like? Isn't my concern? Isn't an explanation I'm owed? All of it, Sebastian said hoarsely. None of it. Eleanor, I can't what? Can't explain. The words landed between them like stones. Eleanor looked at Vivian. The other woman had gone pale, her hands now clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles white. She was younger than Eleanor by a few years, perhaps 28, Though grief had carved lines around her eyes that aged her. Her husband had died 6 months ago. Eleanor remembered attending the funeral, remembered the way Vivian had stood alone by the grave, her small son clutching her skirts, remembered Sebastian insisting they pay their respects, though the Ashcrofts and the Hales had never been particularly close. "Lady Hale," Eleanor said, "do you have something you'd like to say?" Vivian's throat worked. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "I didn't want—" Her voice fractured. "He was trying to help. I asked him not to tell anyone. I made him promise." Eleanor's gaze cut back to Sebastian. "Promise what?" He met her eyes finally, and what she saw there wasn't guilt. It was anguish, raw and wretched and utterly unfamiliar on her husband's face. "I can't tell you," he said. "I gave my word." Something inside Eleanor went very still. "You gave your word," she repeated. "Yes. To her." "Yes. And that matters more than your word to me." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" Eleanor picked up her gloves again, turning them over in her hands. The leather was soft, expensive. She'd bought them last week. Everything in her life was soft and expensive and carefully maintained. 7 years, Sebastian. 7 years I've stood beside you, through your father's death, through the business troubles, through every ugly rumor and every close call. I never asked for perfection. I asked for honesty. I know. And now you stand in my salon, with another woman, and tell me you can't explain because you gave her your word. Eleanor, don't. She held up one gloved hand. Don't make it worse by pretending there's a version of this conversation where I walk away satisfied. Vivian made a small, broken sound. "Mrs. Ashcroft, please. It isn't what you think." "Then tell me what it is." Vivian looked desperately at Sebastian. He shook his head once, sharp and final. Eleanor laughed. It came out bitter. "Extraordinary." She turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" Sebastian's voice cracked again. Eleanor didn't look back. "I don't know yet, but I'm not staying here." "Eleanor, wait." "No." She pulled the door open, pausing only to glance over her shoulder. "If you want me to wait, Sebastian, you'll have to give me a reason. And apparently you can't do that." She walked out into the fading sunlight, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to keep them still. The cottage had been Eleanor's grandmother's, a small stone structure an hour outside the city, nestled at the edge of a wood that had always felt more like sanctuary than wilderness. Eleanor had spent summers there as a child, learning to bake bread in the old iron stove, reading in the window seat while rain drummed against the roof. When her grandmother died, she'd left it to Eleanor specifically. "For when you need to remember who you are," the will had said. Eleanor hadn't understood the bequest at the time. She'd been 22, newly engaged to Sebastian, convinced she'd never need reminding. Now, standing in the cottage's dim front room with her hastily packed bags at her feet, she understood perfectly. The place smelled like old wood and dust and memory. The furniture sat beneath sheets like sleeping ghosts. Eleanor moved through the rooms mechanically, stripping covers, opening windows, sweeping floors. She didn't let herself think. Thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant fracturing, and she refused to fracture. Not yet. Not until she decided what came next. It took 3 days before Sebastian found her. She heard the car first, an unfamiliar sound out here, where the only regular traffic was the postman's bicycle, then footsteps on the gravel path, then his voice calling her name. Eleanor was in the garden, pulling weeds from the overgrown herb beds. She didn't stand, didn't turn. The footsteps stopped a few feet away. "Eleanor!" She yanked a stubborn root free, tossed it onto the growing pile beside her. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to." "Why?" "To tell me you still can't explain?" She brushed dirt from her hands and finally looked up at him. Sebastian looked haggard, unshaven, shadows under his eyes, his shirt wrinkled. Eleanor had never seen him wrinkled. "I need you to come home," he said. "No." "Eleanor?" "I said no." She stood, wiping her palms on her apron. "I'm not coming back until you tell me the truth." "I can't." "Then we have nothing else to discuss." Sebastian's composure cracked. Do you think this is easy for me? Watching you leave? Knowing you think that you believe I'd... What am I supposed to believe? Eleanor's voice rose despite herself. You were alone with her, Sebastian, in my salon. You wouldn't explain. She apologized for something she wouldn't name. What conclusion should I draw? Trust me. The words hung between them. Eleanor felt something hot and sharp rise in her throat. I did trust you, every day. Every time you came home late, every time you said business and expected me not to ask questions. I trusted you when you started taking calls you wouldn't let me overhear, when you'd leave the room to read certain letters, when you'd disappear for hours with excuses that didn't quite add up. Sebastian went very pale. You noticed. Of course I noticed. I'm not blind. I just chose to believe you had reasons, good reasons, that you'd tell me when you were ready. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. She stepped. But you're not going to tell me, are you? Not tomorrow, not next week, maybe not ever. I will, Sebastian said desperately. When I can. When it's what? Safe? Over? When she gives you permission? His silence was answer enough. Eleanor turned away, her vision blurring. Get out. Eleanor, get out of my grandmother's house and don't come back until you're ready to treat me like your wife instead of a liability. She heard him stand there for a long moment, heard his breath catch, heard the gravel crunch as he finally, slowly walked away. Only when the car's engine faded completely did Eleanor allow herself to sink onto the garden bench and press her face into her hands. She didn't cry. Crying would mean acceptance, and she wasn't ready to accept anything yet. A week passed, then another. Eleanor fell into a routine: wake at dawn, tend the garden, walk the woods, cook simple meals, read by lamplight. She wrote letters to the salon's assistant manager, authorizing decisions in her absence. She ignored the notes Sebastian sent, delivered by messenger, never in person, that sat unopened on the kitchen table. She told herself she was choosing strength, independence, self-respect. But at night, lying in her grandmother's narrow bed, she couldn't stop replaying that afternoon. Vivian's face. Not triumphant, not even guilty. Afraid. Vivian Hale had looked absolutely terrified. Not of being caught, of something else entirely. And Sebastian's anguish, that wretched, desperate look, hadn't been the expression of a man caught in infidelity. It had been the expression of a man caught in an impossible position. Eleanor rolled over, staring at the ceiling beams. What if she'd gotten it wrong? What if this wasn't about betrayal at all? The thought lodged itself stubbornly in her mind, refusing to dislodge. By the third week, it had grown into something close to certainty. She needed to know. Not for Sebastian's sake, for her own, because walking away without understanding felt less like strength and more like cowardice. Eleanor returned to the city on a Tuesday. She told no one, hired a car to drop her several streets from home, then walked the rest of the way. Her coat collar turned up against the autumn wind. The house looked the same iron gate, same trimmed hedges, same polished door. But when Eleanor let herself in with her key, she knew immediately something was different. The silence felt occupied. She moved quietly through the front rooms, listening. Voices drifted from Sebastian's study. His voice and another, male, unfamiliar. Eleanor approached the half-open door and stopped just outside, her heart hammering. Can't keep doing this, the unfamiliar voice was saying. You've already paid twice what the property's worth. If anyone starts asking questions, no one will. Sebastian sounded exhausted. The deed transfers directly to her. No intermediaries, no paper trail that traces back to us. And if she asks where the money came from, she won't. She doesn't know enough to ask. What about your wife? Silence. Then, she's gone. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Gone? The other man echoed. As in I destroyed my marriage protecting a promise I can't explain. Sebastian's voice cracked. As in the only woman I've ever loved thinks I'm exactly the kind of man my father was. And I can't tell her she's wrong without breaking my word to a dying woman. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Dying. Vivian has 6 months, Sebastian continued quietly. maybe less. The doctors were clear, and if I don't fix what my brother did before she's gone, her son loses everything, the house, the land, his entire inheritance. Your brother's been dead 2 years. And his sins don't die with him. Sebastian sounded bitter. He forged documents, sold property that wasn't his, pocketed the money, and vanished the evidence. By the time Vivian's husband discovered the truth, he was already ill himself. He made me promise, made me swear, I'd correct it quietly. No scandal, no police, no court. Just fix it before Vivian and the boy are left with nothing. Why you? Because I'm the only one he trusted. Because I was there when he died. Because he knew if it became public, if people learned what my brother had done, it would destroy Vivian's reputation along with his. She'd be questioned, investigated, humiliated. She's already dying. He didn't want her to spend her last months defending herself against my family's crimes. Eleanor leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly unsteady. And your wife doesn't know any of this? Vivian begged me not to tell anyone. She's terrified of scandal, terrified of her son growing up knowing his father's estate was built on theft. I gave her my word. Even at the cost of your marriage? Sebastian's laugh was hollow. I thought I could manage both. I thought I was clever enough to fix everything quietly, and Eleanor would never have to know. I didn't expect her to walk in. Didn't expect... His voice broke. I didn't expect her to look at me like that. Eleanor closed her eyes. What will you do? The other man asked. Finish this. Transfer the deed. Make sure Vivian's affairs are in order. Then... Sebastian stopped. I don't know. Eleanor won't even open my letters. Maybe you should tell her the truth. I can't break my promise. Even if it means losing her? Even then. Eleanor pushed away from the wall and walked silently back down the hall, her mind reeling. She didn't confront him. Not then. Instead, she left the house as quietly as she'd entered and went to the one place she knew would have answers. Vivian Hale's residence was a modest townhouse in a quiet district. Eleanor had been there once before, for the funeral reception. She remembered it being elegant but lived in, full of her late husband's books and her son's scattered toys. Now it looked tired. The paint was peeling. The garden needed tending. Eleanor knocked. A maid answered, startled to see her. Mrs. Ashcroft, I'm afraid Lady Hale isn't receiving... Tell her it's urgent. 5 minutes later, Eleanor sat in Vivian's drawing room. Vivian entered slowly, leaning on a cane Eleanor didn't remember from before. She was thinner, paler. The illness no longer just shadowing her. It was consuming her. Mrs. Ashcroft. Vivian's voice was steady, despite her obvious frailty. I didn't expect... I know, Eleanor said. I know about your husband, about the property, about Sebastian trying to fix it. Vivian sank into the nearest chair, her face crumpling. He told you. No, Eleanor's voice softened. He kept his promise. I overheard. Oh. Vivian pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Oh no, he'll think that I broke. He won't know unless you tell him. Eleanor leaned forward. Lady Hale, Vivian, I need you to understand something. I'm not here to accuse you. I'm here because I need to know the truth, all of it. Vivian studied her for a long moment. Then, haltingly, she began to talk. The story spilled out in fragments. Sebastian's brother, a charming gambler who'd forged deeds to cover debts. Vivian's husband discovering the fraud too late, already dying, desperate to protect his wife and son from the fallout. The deathbed promise extracted from Sebastian, fix this quietly, no matter the cost. He didn't want to keep secrets from you, Vivian said, tears streaming down her face. He argued with me, told me you deserved to know. But I begged him. I was so afraid of scandal, afraid of my son learning his father was robbed by criminals, afraid of being pitied and questioned, and her voice broke. I made him choose, his promise to a dying woman or his honesty to you. I'm so sorry. I'm so desperately sorry. Eleanor sat back, her mind spinning. That day at the salon, she said quietly. What were you doing there? Saying goodbye. Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. Sebastian had just finalized the last transfer. The property's secure now. My son's inheritance is safe. I went to thank him, to release him from his promise. I told him he should tell you everything, that I'd explain if you needed to hear it from me. She closed her eyes, and then you walked in, and I saw your face, and I knew I'd ruined everything. Eleanor stood, moving to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. Normal. While inside, everything she'd believed for 3 weeks was turning itself inside out. He could have told me, she said, after you released him. He could have explained. I don't think he knew how. Vivian's voice was soft. I think by then he was too afraid. Afraid you'd hate him for keeping the secret in the first place. Afraid the damage was already done. Eleanor turned. Are you dying? Yes. How long? 4 months. Maybe less. And the boy? Your son. He's safe now, thanks to your husband. Vivian's eyes were red-rimmed but steady. Sebastian Ashcroft saved my child's future without asking for anything in return. He sacrificed his marriage to keep a promise to a dead man he barely knew. He's the most honorable person I've ever met. Eleanor's throat tightened. He should have trusted me. Yes, Vivian agreed quietly. He should have. But fear makes fools of us all. Eleanor didn't go home. Not immediately. She walked the city streets for hours, her mind working through everything she'd learned, turning it over, examining it from every angle. Sebastian hadn't betrayed her, but he had excluded her, chosen a stranger's fears over his wife's right to know. Decided unilaterally what Eleanor could handle. The realization settled in her chest like a stone. This wasn't about forgiveness. Forgiveness implied a simple transgression, easily absolved. This was about trust, about partnership, about the fundamental architecture of their marriage. And that architecture had revealed a flaw Eleanor couldn't ignore. By the time she returned to the cottage, in her name, her sanctuary, she knew what she had to do. But not yet. Not until she'd decided, with absolute clarity, what kind of marriage she was willing to return to, if she returned at all. Sebastian's next letter arrived 3 days later. Unlike the others, this one wasn't sealed. Eleanor opened it at the kitchen table, her hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. Eleanor, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not even asking you to come home. I'm asking you to let me tell you the truth. Not because I've been released from my promise, though I have. Lady Hale came to me yesterday and insisted I explain everything to you, regardless of the cost to her. But because I should have told you from the beginning, should have trusted that you were strong enough to carry the secret, smart enough to help me navigate it, worthy enough to be my partner in more than just name. I failed you. Not by keeping the secret itself, but by deciding you weren't entitled to it. If you'll let me, I'd like to tell you about my brother's crimes, about Vivian's husband's death, about the promise I made and why I thought keeping it mattered more than keeping your trust. I'd like to explain why I was wrong, but only if you want to hear it. I'll be at the cottage tomorrow at noon. If you're not there, I'll understand. I'll let you go. I love you. I should have said that more. I should have shown it better. Sebastian Eleanor read the letter twice. Then she set it down, poured herself tea, and sat by the window until the sun set and the stars emerged. Tomorrow at noon. One conversation. One chance to decide whether the man she'd married was the man she wanted to stay married to. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to imagine her life without him. The cottage, the garden, the quiet. It felt like survival, but survival wasn't the same as living. But at 11:50 the next morning, Eleanor was waiting. She'd set 2 chairs in the garden, brewed fresh tea, arranged everything with the same precision she'd once used to run her salon. When Sebastian's car pulled up at noon exactly, she didn't move. He walked through the gate, stopped when he saw her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Eleanor gestured to the empty chair. Sit, she said, and tell me everything. Sebastian sat, and he told her everything. His brother's gambling, the forged documents, the dying man's desperation, the promise extracted in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and death. Vivian's fear, the property transfers, the legal maze, The impossible choice between honor to a stranger and honesty to his wife. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When he finished, his voice was raw, his hands shaking around his teacup. "I thought I was protecting you," he said quietly. From the ugliness of it, from having to lie if anyone asked, from being complicit in covering up a crime, even to do the right thing. He looked at her finally. "I was protecting myself. From your judgment. From having to admit my family was capable of such things. From the possibility that you'd see me differently." "I do see you differently," Eleanor said. Sebastian flinched. "I see a man who kept a promise at terrible cost," Eleanor continued. "I see someone who tried to fix his brother's sins without punishing an innocent woman. I see honor." She paused. "But I also see a husband who didn't trust his wife, who made decisions for her instead of with her, who chose to bear everything alone rather than share the weight." "I'm sorry. I know." Eleanor set down her cup. "But sorry isn't enough." Sebastian's face went pale. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I can't come back to the marriage we had, where you decide what I'm strong enough to handle, where secrets are kept for my own good, where I'm protected instead of trusted. Then what I'm saying, if I come back, it's to a different marriage, one where we make hard choices together, where you tell me the truth even when it's ugly, where I'm your partner, not your dependent." Sebastian stared at her. "You'd come back?" "I don't know yet." Eleanor stood, walked to the edge of the garden where wild roses tangled with the fence. "I need time. To decide if I believe you've learned what you did wrong, to decide if I can trust you not to do it again." "How much time?" "As much as I need." She turned to face him. "I'm keeping this cottage, Sebastian, in my name, not ours. Mine." His jaw worked. "All right. If I come home, it's because I choose to. Not because I have nowhere else to go. Not because I need you financially, because I want to be your wife." "I understand. Do you?" Eleanor stepped closer. "Because I'm not the woman who left 3 weeks ago. I won't be managed. I won't be coddled. I won't accept half-truths dressed up as protection." "I don't want you to." Sebastian's voice was fierce. "I want—" He stopped, then started again. "I want the woman who walked into that salon and demanded answers. The woman who left rather than accept lies. The woman standing in front of me right now, telling me exactly what she needs." Eleanor searched his face. "You hurt me. I know. If I let you try again, and you make the same choice, I won't. You can't promise that. You don't know what you'll do when the next impossible situation comes." "You're right." Sebastian stood, closing the distance between them carefully. "I can't promise I'll always make the right choice, but I can promise I'll make it with you. Not for you, with you." Eleanor felt something in her chest loosen. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. "I need 2 more weeks," she said. "Take a month." "Sebastian, well, take as long as you need." His hand lifted, then fell back to his side. "I'll wait." Eleanor looked at him. This man she'd married 7 years ago. This stranger she was just beginning to know again. "Ask me," she said quietly. "Ask you what?" "Ask me to come home. Not like you're entitled to it, like you're hoping for it." Sebastian's eyes were bright. "Eleanor, will you—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Will you come home? Please?" Eleanor didn't answer, not with words. She stepped forward and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't romantic. It was hard and honest and tasted like salt and tea and everything they'd broken and might, possibly, rebuild. When she pulled back, Sebastian was staring at her like he'd forgotten how to breathe. 2 weeks, Eleanor said. "And then we'll talk about terms." "Terms?" "Terms." She almost smiled. "If you want me back, Sebastian Ashcroft, you're going to have to earn it. Tell me how, Suts." "I'll think about it." Eleanor stepped away, smoothing her skirt. "In the meantime, you should go." "Eleanor, go." But her voice was softer now. "I'll write when I'm ready." Sebastian nodded slowly. He walked to the gate, paused, looked back. "I love you," he said. "I know," Eleanor replied. And this time, watching him leave, she believed it. But love alone had never been the question. Trust was. And trust, Eleanor was learning, wasn't given back freely. It was rebuilt, slowly, stone by stone. Whether Sebastian had the patience for that remained to be seen. The 2 weeks stretched into 3. Not because Eleanor was punishing Sebastian, though part of her wondered if that's what it looked like from the outside, but because every time she sat down to write the letter that would bring her home, her hand froze over the paper. What did she actually want to say? Come back to me and I'll pretend nothing happened? Come back and we'll start fresh? Come back and everything will be different? None of it felt true. She spent her days in a strange state of suspension. The cottage had become both refuge and prison, and Eleanor found herself walking the same paths through the woods until her feet knew them by heart. The garden flourished under her attention. The house gleamed. But Eleanor herself felt stuck, caught between the woman she'd been and whoever she was becoming. On the 18th day, a letter arrived that wasn't from Sebastian. Eleanor recognized Vivian's handwriting on the envelope, spidery and uncertain, the writing of someone whose hands no longer fully obeyed. She opened it standing at the kitchen counter, still wearing her gardening gloves. Mrs. Ashcroft, I'm told I have perhaps 6 weeks remaining. The doctors were optimistic, as doctors tend to be when they're lying. I'm writing to tell you that I've instructed my solicitor to add a codicil to my will. Upon my death, a sealed letter will be delivered to you. In it, I've documented everything, every detail of what your husband did, every sacrifice he made, every moment he chose honor over ease. I'm not writing this to absolve him. That's between you. But I wanted you to have proof from my own hand that he never betrayed you, not in the way you feared. I also wanted to say that if you choose not to return to him, I'll understand. Sometimes love isn't enough to repair what's been broken. Sometimes the cost of rebuilding is more than we can bear. But if you do go back, know that you're returning to a man who understands the weight of promises, who knows what it costs to keep them, who learned too late that the most important promise he ever made was to you. My son asks about you sometimes. He remembers you from the funeral. He says you were the only person who didn't look at him with pity, just kindness. Thank you for that. VH. Eleanor read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer where she kept Sebastian's unopened notes. 6 weeks. A woman was dying, and Eleanor was hiding in the woods, trying to decide if she was brave enough to go home. The thought shamed her. She sat down at the kitchen table and finally began to write. The letter took her 4 hours. She wrote it, crossed it out, started again. The second version was too cold. The third too forgiving. The fourth came closer, but still felt wrong, like she was performing forgiveness instead of feeling it. By the time darkness fell, she'd written nothing she was willing to send. Instead, she put on her coat and walked into the village. The pub was warm and loud, full of local farmers and their families. Eleanor slipped into a corner table and ordered whiskey, which she never drank, and sat nursing it while the noise washed over her. Thought that was you. Eleanor looked up. Margaret Frost stood beside the table, holding a glass of red wine and wearing an expression of mild surprise. Margaret ran the village bookshop and had known Eleanor since childhood. She'd also been widowed young and never remarried. May I? Margaret gestured to the empty chair. Eleanor nodded. Margaret sat, studying her with the frank assessment of someone who'd earned the right to pry. Heard you were back at your grandmother's place. Heard your husband's been driving out weekly, looking hopeful and leaving disappointed. Village gossip still efficient, then? Merciless. Margaret sipped her wine. Want to talk about it? Not particularly. Want me to tell you what I think, anyway? Despite everything, Eleanor almost smiled. Would it stop you if I said no? Not even slightly. Margaret leaned back. You're angry. Observant. And you're right to be angry, but you're also hiding. Eleanor's jaw tightened. I'm not hiding. No? What would you call it? Taking time, getting clarity, deciding what I want. Margaret swirled her wine. And how's that working? Eleanor didn't answer. Here's what I know about marriage, Margaret said. It's not the big betrayals that kill it. It's the small erosions, the daily choosing of self over partnership, the 1,000 tiny decisions to protect yourself instead of trust the other person. She paused. Your husband made one catastrophically stupid choice, but he made it for complicated reasons. And he's paying for it. The question isn't whether he was wrong. He was. The question is whether you want to be married to a man who's capable of being wrong. Of course I don't. Then you want to be alone. Because perfect men don't exist, and the ones who pretend to be perfect are the most dangerous of all. Eleanor took a long drink of whiskey, felt it burn down her throat. He lied to me. He kept a secret. There's a difference. Is there? I think so. But that's something you have to decide for yourself. Margaret stood, collecting her glass. For what it's worth. The man who drove out here every week, looking like hell, just hoping for a glimpse of you? That's not a man who takes you for granted. That's a man who knows exactly what he lost. She left Eleanor sitting alone with her whiskey and her thoughts. She left Eleanor. When Eleanor finally walked home, the moon was high and the air had turned cold. She let herself into the cottage and stood in the dark kitchen, not bothering with lamps. Then she went to the drawer and pulled out all of Sebastian's letters, 14 of them, unopened. One by one, she broke the seals and read. The first few were desperate. Apologies stacked on apologies, explanations that circled without landing. By the 7th, the tone had changed. Less begging, more reflection. By the 12th, he'd stopped apologizing altogether and started simply talking about his day, about the salon, about small things he thought she'd want to know. The last letter, dated 3 days ago, was different. Eleanor, I'm not going to ask when you're coming back. I'm not going to ask if you're coming back. Instead, I'm going to tell you what I've been doing. I've been meeting with Vivian's solicitor twice weekly. The property transfers are complete, but there are still legal details to manage. Her son's guardianship arrangements, the trust fund, the sale of items she wants liquidated before she's too ill to make decisions. I've been thinking about what you said, about making decisions with you instead of for you. And I realized I don't know how to do that. I never learned. My father made every decision in our household. My mother accepted them without question, at least publicly. I watched that my entire childhood and assumed it was what marriage looked like. A man protects, a woman trusts. The end. It never occurred to me that protection could be its own form of dismissal. I'm trying to learn differently. It's harder than I expected. Yesterday I had to decide whether to approve the sale of Vivian's late husband's book collection, valuable first editions, enough to fund her son's education. She asked my opinion, and my first instinct was to simply tell her what to do. But I stopped. Asked her what she wanted, what her husband would have wanted, what felt right to her. She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Then she laughed and said, "Your wife's been good for you." I don't know if that's true, but I hope she's right. I hope you're good for me. I hope I can learn to be better for you. I'm not asking you to come home. I'm just asking you to believe I'm trying. S. Eleanor set the letter down with shaking hands. She'd expected more apologies, more promises, more desperate attempts to convince her. Instead, he'd given her honesty, progress, the messy, imperfect work of actually changing. And somehow, that was more compelling than any declaration of love. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. This time, the words came easily. Sebastian, I'm coming home, but not yet. First, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take me to see Vivian. Eleanor sealed the letter before she could second-guess herself and walked it to the postbox in the pre-dawn darkness. By the time the sun rose, it was gone. Sebastian's reply arrived the next afternoon, delivered by his own hand. Eleanor heard the car and opened the door before he could knock. He looked better than he had 3 weeks ago, still tired, but steadier, like a man who'd stopped waiting for rescue and started building a raft. You want to visit Vivian? He said without preamble. Yes. May I ask why? Eleanor stepped aside, letting him into the cottage. Because I need to hear it from her, all of it, and I need you there while she tells me. Sebastian studied her face. You don't believe me. I believe you. But I need to understand, and I can't understand from letters and second-hand explanations. She met his eyes. I need to see what you saw, feel what you felt, know why you thought this promise mattered more than our marriage. It didn't. I know that now, but you thought it did, and I need to understand why. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll arrange it. When? Tomorrow. She's very ill, Eleanor. It might be difficult. I'm not afraid of difficult. Something in Sebastian's expression shifted. No, I suppose you're not. He left shortly after, promising to send word about the time. Eleanor watched him drive away and felt the first flicker of something that might have been hope, or might have been terror. She wasn't sure there was much difference anymore. The next day arrived gray and cold, threatening rain. Sebastian collected Eleanor at 10, and they drove to Vivian's townhouse in near silence. Eleanor watched the countryside give way to city streets and felt her stomach twist. She knows we're coming, Sebastian said quietly. She wants to see you. Did you tell her why? I told her you had questions. She said she'd been expecting them. Vivian's maid answered the door, looking relieved to see them, which Eleanor found curious until they were shown into the drawing room, and she saw why. Vivian sat in a wheelchair, wrapped in blankets despite the fire burning in the grate. She'd lost more weight since Eleanor had seen her last. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, as if she were already halfway to becoming a ghost, but her eyes were sharp and clear when she looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Ashcroft, thank you for coming. Thank you for seeing me. Eleanor sat in the chair across from her, acutely aware of Sebastian standing stiffly by the door. I hope I'm not intruding. You're not. Vivian's smile was faint. To be honest, I'm grateful. I've wanted to speak with you properly for weeks, but I didn't dare. I thought you'd rather never see me again. I won't lie, there were moments I felt that way. I don't blame you. Vivian's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the blanket across her lap. Your husband tells me you want to know everything, the whole story. If you're strong enough to tell it. Oh, I'm dying, Mrs. Ashcroft, not fragile. There's a difference. Vivian's tone was dry. Where would you like me to start? The beginning. When Sebastian's brother first approached your husband. Vivian nodded slowly. That would be about 3 years ago. My husband, Richard, owned land north of the city. Good land, valuable. Marcus Ashcroft came to him with a proposal to develop part of it. Build estates, sell lots. Richard was hesitant, but Marcus was persuasive, charming. Her mouth twisted. Dishonest. Sebastian flinched but said nothing. They drew up papers, Vivian continued. Or rather, Marcus presented papers he claimed were drawn up by his solicitor. Richard signed them, believing they were standard partnership agreements. He had no reason to distrust a man from such a prominent family. She paused, her breathing labored. 6 months later, Marcus had sold 3 parcels of the land as if he owned them outright, pocketed the money, vanished the documentation. And your husband didn't realize? Eleanor asked gently. Not immediately. Marcus was clever. He structured everything to look legitimate. By the time Richard discovered what had happened, Marcus was dead, killed in a riding accident, and the buyers had legal deeds bearing signatures that looked authentic enough to hold up in court. Forgeries, Sebastian said quietly from his position by the door. Perfect forgeries, Vivian agreed. Richard tried to fight it legally, but his solicitor advised against it. Said the scandal would ruin both families. Said it would be Richard's word against signed documents, and the Ashcroft name would lend credibility to Marcus's fraud. She looked at Eleanor. Richard was already sick by then. Consumption. He knew he didn't have long, and he was terrified of leaving me and our son with nothing but debts and legal battles. Eleanor's throat tightened. So he went to Sebastian. Not immediately. First, he tried to handle it quietly himself. But he was too weak. The illness progressed faster than expected. Vivian's voice dropped. I'll never forget the day Sebastian came to visit. Richard had requested the meeting, but he could barely sit up. I had to help him dress. Had to hold the water glass when he tried to drink. Sebastian made a small, pained sound. Richard made him promise, Vivian said. Made him swear he'd fix what Marcus had done without destroying my reputation or our son's future. And your husband... She looked at Sebastian with something like wonder. Ah. He agreed, without hesitation, even though it meant taking responsibility for his brother's crimes, even though it would cost him time and money, and her eyes shifted to Eleanor. Potentially his marriage. He should have told me, Eleanor said. Yes, Vivian agreed simply. He should have. I told him so, multiple times. Eleanor blinked. You did? Of course. I'm not a monster, Mrs. Ashcroft. I didn't want your marriage destroyed for my sake. Vivian leaned forward slightly. But your husband is remarkably stubborn when he believes he's doing the right thing. And he believed, truly believed, that keeping you ignorant would keep you safe. Safe from what? From complicity. From being questioned if the fraud was ever discovered. From having to lie to protect me. Vivian's gaze was unflinching. He thought if you didn't know, you couldn't be blamed. Eleanor looked at Sebastian. He was staring at the floor, his jaw tight. That's not protection, Eleanor said quietly. That's control. I know that, Sebastian said, his voice rough. I know that now. Do you? Eleanor stood, crossing to where he stood. Or do you just know that I was angry enough to leave? Sebastian finally met her eyes. I know that I treated you like someone who needed shielding instead of someone who deserved truth. I know I made decisions about our marriage without consulting you. I know... He stopped, swallowed hard. I know I was wrong. Not just in keeping the secret, in believing I had the right to keep it. The silence stretched between them. Vivian broke it. Mrs. Ashcroft, may I ask you something? Eleanor turned. Of course. What would you have done if he'd told you from the beginning? Eleanor considered the question carefully. I don't know. I'd like to think I would have helped, been a partner in solving it, but honestly, she shook her head. I might have been angry, might have resented being pulled into your family's crisis, might have said the wrong thing or made it worse somehow. Exactly, Vivian said softly. You might have. And that uncertainty terrified your husband more than any scandal. So he chose certainty over trust. Yes. Eleanor looked at Sebastian. Is that true? Yes, he admitted. I was afraid. Afraid you'd be angry. Afraid you'd think less of me for not controlling my brother better. Afraid you'd refuse to help. And I'd have to choose between honoring Richard's dying wish and keeping peace with you. His hands clenched at his sides. So I chose to carry it alone. And I destroyed us anyway. You didn't destroy us, Eleanor said, but you damaged us badly. I know. And if something like this happens again, it won't. You can't promise that, Sebastian. Life is complicated, messy. There will be other impossible situations. Then I'll face them with you. His voice was fierce. Not for you, not around you, with you. Even if it's hard, even if it means fighting, even if... He stopped, his composure cracking. Even if you decide you can't forgive me this time, I swear to you, Eleanor, I learned. This broke something in me, changed something. I can't go back to the man who thought he could protect you by keeping you in the dark. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness, not quite, but the possibility of it. She turned back to Vivian. Thank you for telling me. I should have told you sooner. Maybe, but you were dying and frightened. I understand that. Eleanor managed a small smile, and you released him from the promise. That took courage. Vivian's eyes glistened. I couldn't let him lose you because of me. I'd already taken too much. You didn't take anything, Sebastian said roughly. I gave it. That was my choice. A choice you regret, Vivian said. A choice I'd make differently now, Sebastian corrected. The promise itself? Helping you, protecting your son, I don't regret that. But the way I handled it, the secrets, the exclusion, he looked at Eleanor. That I regret with everything in me. Eleanor studied her husband, this man she'd loved for 7 years, who'd proven himself both honorable and foolish in equal measure. I'd like to help, she said abruptly. Both Sebastian and Vivian stared at her. Help with what? Vivian asked. Whatever still needs doing. The legal details, the trust arrangements, your son's education fund. Eleanor sat back down. You said there are still things to manage. Let me help manage them. Mrs. Ashcroft, I couldn't possibly, Why not? Eleanor's tone was matter-of-fact. Sebastian's been handling it alone for months, but 2 people can work faster than 1. And frankly, she glanced at her husband, I think it's time I understood exactly what this promise cost him, not just in the abstract, in the specific. Sebastian looked stunned. Eleanor, you don't have to. Zima. I know I don't have to. I want to. She met his eyes. This is what partnership looks like, isn't it? Sharing the burden, even the burdens we didn't create. Something in Sebastian's expression crumbled. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might cry. Instead, he nodded once, sharp and certain. All right, he said hoarsely. All right. Vivian looked between them, her face unreadable. Then slowly she smiled. Your wife is extraordinary, Mr. Ashcroft. I know, Sebastian said quietly. I've always known. They spent the next 2 hours going over documents and details. Vivian's solicitor was summoned. Papers were reviewed. Eleanor asked pointed questions that Sebastian hadn't thought to ask, found gaps in arrangements that needed addressing, suggested solutions that were both practical and compassionate. By the time they left, Eleanor's head was spinning with information, but she also felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Useful. Needed. Trusted. Sebastian drove them back toward the cottage in thoughtful silence. As they neared the turnoff, he spoke. Thank you. For what? For coming, for listening, for... He stopped, gripping the steering wheel. For not giving up on me. I haven't decided not to give up on you, Eleanor said. I'm still deciding. I know. But I'm leaning toward yes. Sebastian's hands tightened on the wheel. What changed your mind? You did. Not with your letters, not with your apologies. Eleanor looked out the window at the passing trees. With your work, with the way you've been trying, actually trying. It's not enough. No, Eleanor agreed. But it's a start. They reached the cottage. Sebastian pulled up but didn't turn off the engine. Are you staying? Eleanor asked. Do you want me to? Eleanor considered. Then, surprising herself, she nodded. Yes, but not in the house. Sebastian's eyebrows rose. There's a barn, Eleanor explained. Out back, it's been converted, has a small room with a bed. My grandmother used it for guests who needed privacy. You want me to sleep in the barn? I want you close, but not too close. Eleanor opened the car door. I'm not ready to share a bed again. Not yet, but I'm ready to try sharing space. Sebastian stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen in weeks. I'll take it, he said. They spent the evening in careful orbit around each other. Eleanor cooked dinner, simple fare, nothing fancy. Sebastian washed up afterward, meticulous and grateful. They sat by the fire and talked about safe things, the garden, the village, the upcoming harvest festival. Neither mentioned the marriage. Neither needed to. When the fire burned low, Eleanor stood. The barn's unlocked. There are blankets in the chest. Thank you. Sebastian rose but didn't move toward the door. Instead, he stood there, looking at his wife like he was memorizing her. Eleanor. Yes? I love you. I need you to know that. Whatever you decide. Eleanor's throat tightened. I know. She watched him walk across the garden toward the barn, his silhouette dark against the moonlit grass. Then she closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the solid wood. She'd let him close. Not all the way back in, but close. It would have to be enough. For now, for now. The words echoed in Eleanor's mind as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling beams. Through the window, she could see the faint glow of lamplight from the barn. Sebastian was awake too then. She turned over, punched the pillow into a different shape, tried to settle, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept circling back to Vivian's drawing room, to the document spread across the table, to the look on Sebastian's face when Eleanor had offered to help. He'd looked terrified, relieved, like a man who'd been drowning and suddenly felt solid ground beneath his feet. But Eleanor wasn't solid ground, not yet. She was still deciding whether to be ground at all or simply water that would let him sink. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling. Eleanor woke to find Sebastian already up, splitting wood by the barn despite the rain. She watched him from the kitchen window, the rhythmic swing of the axe, the precise way he stacked the split logs, the methodical nature of someone working out tension through physical labor. When he finally came in, soaked and breathing hard, Eleanor had coffee waiting. "Thank you," he said, accepting the cup with hands that trembled slightly from exertion. "You didn't have to do that. I needed to do something useful." They drank in silence. Then Sebastian set down his cup and said, "Vivian's solicitor sent a message this morning. There's a problem with one of the property transfers." Eleanor looked up sharply. "What kind of problem?" "One of the buyers, a man named Garrett, is claiming he never received proper title. He's threatening to sue unless we can produce documentation proving the transfer was legitimate." "Can you?" "I thought I could. But the papers Marcus forged were apparently too good. They're claiming now that the forgery makes the entire transaction void." Sebastian's jaw tightened. If Garrett pursues this, it could unravel everything, every transfer, every sale. The whole settlement could collapse. Eleanor set down her own cup with a sharp click. "How much time do we have?" "A week. Maybe less. He's given Vivian until next Friday to produce ironclad proof of ownership, or he takes it to court." "And if it goes to court?" "Vivian's dragged into depositions. Her husband's name gets pulled through the scandal Richard died trying to avoid. Marcus's fraud becomes public record, and Vivian's son grows up knowing his family fortune was built on theft and lies." Sebastian's voice was flat. "Everything we've done for the past 6 months will have been for nothing." Eleanor stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the rain had intensified, turning the garden into a blur of gray and green. "There has to be a way," she said. "I've been over the documents 100 times. There's no legal path that doesn't expose the forgery." "Then we need an illegal one." Sebastian stared at her. "What?" Eleanor turned to face him, her mind already working through possibilities. "You said Garrett's claiming he never received proper title. What if we gave him what he's asking for?" "Eleanor, we can't forge." "I'm not talking about forging. I'm talking about buying him off. He doesn't want money. He wants the property returned." Quote, "Everyone wants money, Sebastian. They just don't always know it yet." Eleanor crossed back to the table, pulled out the chair, sat. What does Garrett actually care about? The land itself, or proving he was wronged? Sebastian considered. Proving he was wronged, probably. He's the type who likes being right more than being rich. Then we give him the satisfaction of being right and compensate him handsomely for the inconvenience. Eleanor leaned forward. We acknowledge there was an administrative error in the transfer. Nothing criminal, just bureaucratic incompetence. We offer to buy back the property at twice what he paid, plus damages for his trouble. That's... Sebastian stopped. "That's actually brilliant, but where do we get that kind of money? I've already depleted most of my liquid assets fixing the other transfers." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "We sell the salon." The silence that followed was absolute. "No," Sebastian said finally. "Absolutely not. That's yours, Eleanor. I'm not letting you sacrifice." "It's not a sacrifice. It's an investment." Eleanor kept her voice level. "The salon's worth enough to cover Garrett and then some. And frankly, I've been thinking about selling anyway. It's become more obligation than passion." "Since when?" "Since I realized I was pouring all my energy into managing a business instead of living a life." Eleanor stood again, restless. "I built that salon from nothing, Sebastian. I'm proud of that. But I'm not so attached to it that I'd let a dying woman and her child suffer when I could prevent it." Sebastian shook his head slowly. "You're offering to give up everything you built for a stranger. For what's right. There's a difference." "Eleanor, don't argue with me on this. I've made up my mind." Sebastian looked at her like he'd never seen her before. "You're serious?" "Completely. You'd really sell the salon for Vivian, for Vivian's son, for your brother's crimes, for the chance to actually be your partner instead of just your wife." Eleanor's voice sharpened. "And maybe for the chance to prove to myself that I'm capable of making hard choices too, instead of just judging yours." Something shifted in Sebastian's expression. "That's not fair to yourself." "Isn't it? I left rather than fight, hid rather than engage. I was so busy being righteously angry that I never stopped to ask what I could do to help fix things." She moved closer. You made mistakes, Sebastian, big ones. But at least you were trying to solve an impossible problem. I was just running away from it. You didn't know. I could have asked, could have pushed harder, could have refused to accept your silence. Eleanor's hands clenched. Instead, I assumed the worst and retreated to my grandmother's cottage to nurse my wounded pride. That's not strength. That's cowardice. Stop. Sebastian crossed to her, gripped her shoulders. You're not a coward. You're the bravest person I know. Then let me prove it. Eleanor looked up at him. Let me help, really help. Not just reviewing documents, but making actual sacrifices, taking actual risks. Sebastian's hands tightened on her shoulders. Then, slowly, he released her and stepped back. All right, he said quietly. If you're certain. I am. Well, then we'll talk to your broker tomorrow, see what the salon's actually worth, and whether we can move quickly enough. But... Eleanor nodded. Then, impulsively, she reached out and took his hand. Sebastian froze. Thank you, Eleanor said. For what? For letting me in. Finally. His fingers curled around hers, warm and solid. Thank you for coming back. I haven't yet. Not all the way. I know, but you're here. That's enough. They stood like that for a moment, hands clasped, the rain drumming steadily against the windows. Then Eleanor pulled away. I need to go into the city. Talk to my staff before word gets out that I'm selling. I'll drive you. No, this is something I need to do alone. Sebastian looked like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. All right, but Eleanor, yes? Be careful. The salon's in a good neighborhood, but there's been talk of labor unrest, protests. Some of the factory workers are getting aggressive. I'll be fine. Just promise me you'll be aware, said. Eleanor almost smiled. I promise. The city felt different when Eleanor arrived late that afternoon. There was a tension in the air she couldn't quite name, a restlessness in the crowds, a sharpness in the way people moved through the streets. Sebastian's warning about unrest echoed in her mind, but she pushed it aside. She had work to do. The salon stood on a corner lot, its brass fixtures gleaming even in the gray light. Eleanor had chosen the location herself 7 years ago, negotiated the lease, designed every detail of the interior. Walking through the door now felt like stepping into a past life. Mrs. Ashcroft, her assistant manager, a competent woman named Clara, looked up from the appointment book with obvious surprise. We didn't expect you today. Well, I know, I should have sent word. Eleanor removed her gloves, set down her bag. Is everyone here? Most of the staff, yes. Why? Is something wrong? I need to speak with all of you. Can you gather everyone in the main salon in 10 minutes? Clara's expression shifted from surprise to concern. Of course. Eleanor spent those 10 minutes walking through the familiar space, running her hand along the velvet chairs, checking the inventory, studying the careful records Clara had maintained in her absence. Everything was in perfect order. The salon had thrived without her. The realization should have stung. Instead, it felt liberating. When the staff assembled, 7 women and 2 men, all of whom Eleanor had hired personally, she faced them with as much composure as she could muster. Thank you for gathering on short notice. I have an announcement, and I wanted you to hear it from me directly. She paused, meeting each person's eyes. I'm selling the salon, but the silence was immediate and total. Then Clara spoke. When? As soon as possible. Within the week, if I can manage it. But why? One of the younger stylists, a girl named Marie, looked stricken. Did we do something wrong? No, you've all been exceptional. This isn't about the business. It's personal. Is it your marriage? Clara asked bluntly. The rumors are nobody's concern but mine and my husband's. Eleanor kept her tone firm, but not unkind. What matters is this. I'm committed to finding a buyer who will retain all of you. Your positions, your wages, your working conditions, all of it is non-negotiable. And if you can't find such a buyer, this from James, the senior barber, then I won't sell until I do. The tension in the room eased fractionally. I know this is sudden, Eleanor continued, and I know it's unsettling, But I promise you, I will not leave you unprotected. You have my word. Clara stepped forward. Mrs. Ashcroft, if I may, is there anything we can do to change your mind? Eleanor felt her throat tighten. No, but I appreciate the offer more than you know. She spent the next hour answering questions, soothing concerns, making promises she intended to keep. By the time the staff dispersed, Eleanor was exhausted, but also certain this was the right choice. She was locking up the salon's cash box when the sound of breaking glass shattered the quiet. Eleanor spun toward the front windows. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Factory workers, she realized, recognizing the rough clothes and angry faces. They were marching down the street, shouting slogans she couldn't quite make out. One of them threw something, a rock maybe, or a bottle. It struck the window of the shop across the street with a sharp crack. Eleanor's heart hammered. She moved quickly to the door, turned the lock, pulled the shade. The shouting grew louder. She retreated to the back office, debating whether to wait it out or try to slip out the rear entrance. The protests Sebastian had mentioned, they were happening now, apparently, and she was trapped in the middle of them. Another crash. Closer this time. Eleanor grabbed her coat and bag, moved toward the back door. But before she could reach it, the front window exploded inward in a shower of glass. She froze. Men poured through the broken window. Not many, maybe 4 or 5. They weren't looking at her. They were looking at the cash register, the expensive fixtures, the bottles of imported cologne. Looters. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall, praying they wouldn't notice her in the dim back hallway. Her mind raced through options. The back door was 15 feet away. If she moved quietly, someone's here! One of them had spotted her. Eleanor bolted for the back door. Her hands fumbled with the lock, slick with sweat. Behind her, footsteps pounded across the salon floor. The lock gave. She wrenched the door open and ran into the alley. Rain lashed her face. The alley was narrow and dark, blocked at one end by a delivery wagon. She ran the other direction, her boots slipping on wet cobblestones. Behind her, shouts. Pursuit. Eleanor's breath came in ragged gasps. She'd never been athletic, had never needed to be. Now she cursed every comfortable day she'd spent behind a desk instead of walking, running, preparing for something like this. The alley opened onto a side street. Eleanor burst out, nearly colliding with a well-dressed couple who cried out in alarm. She didn't stop, couldn't stop. She ran 3 more blocks before ducking into a doorway, pressing herself into the shadows. Her lungs burned. Her hands shook, but the footsteps behind her had faded. She'd lost them. Eleanor slumped against the door, fighting the urge to vomit. Around her, the city continued its evening routine, people hurrying home, shops closing, lamplighters making their rounds. As if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just fled for her life from her own business. She waited 10 minutes before emerging from the doorway, waited another 5 before her hands stopped shaking enough to hail a cab. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked. Eleanor almost said the cottage, then stopped. "The Ashcroft residence," she said instead, quickly. The driver must have heard something in her voice. He didn't ask questions, just snapped the reins. Eleanor arrived home. The word felt strange, but accurate. Just as full dark settled. The house was lit, warm light spilling from the windows. She paid the driver with shaking hands and stumbled up the front steps. The door opened before she could knock. Sebastian took one look at her, soaked, disheveled, her dress torn at the hem, and went pale. What happened? Eleanor walked past him into the foyer, dripping water onto the marble. There was a protest. It turned violent. The salon... Her voice broke. They smashed the windows, tried to loot it. I ran. Sebastian's hands were on her shoulders, turning her to face him. Are you hurt? No, shaken, but not hurt. Did anyone follow you? I don't think so. I lost them in the alleys. Sebastian exhaled sharply, pulled her against his chest. Eleanor went rigid for a moment, then collapsed into him, her face pressed against his wet shirt. I was so stupid, she whispered. You warned me. You told me to be careful. This isn't your fault. I should have listened, should have waited, should have... Stop. Sebastian's arms tightened around her. You're safe. That's all that matters. Eleanor pulled back, swiping at her eyes. The salon's destroyed. Everything I built can be repaired, rebuilt, sold, whatever needs to happen. Sebastian cupped her face in his hands. But you're alive. You're here. Nothing else matters. Eleanor stared at him, at the genuine terror still lingering in his expression, and felt something crack open in her chest. I was so angry at you, she said. For months I was furious. And maybe I still am, a little. But tonight, running through those alleys, all I could think was, what if I never got to tell you that I understand? What if I died angry and you never knew that I finally understood why you did what you did? Sebastian's eyes were bright. Eleanor! You were trying to protect someone, trying to fix something broken, trying to do the right thing even when it cost you everything. She gripped his wrists. I've been punishing you for that, for being human and imperfect and making a choice I didn't agree with. But tonight, her voice caught. Tonight I made a choice. I chose to go into the city alone, despite your warning, and it nearly got me killed. So who am I to judge your choices when mine are just as flawed? That's not the same, isn't it? We both tried to do what we thought was right. We both failed to consider the full consequences. We both... She stopped, laughed shakily. We're both just people, Sebastian, trying our best and getting it wrong sometimes. Sebastian pulled her close again, this time pressing his face into her hair. I thought I'd lost you. When the protests started spreading, when I heard they'd reached your district, I couldn't breathe. I kept imagining, I'm here. I know. He pulled back, looked at her intently. But Eleanor, you need to understand something. If choosing between keeping a promise and keeping you safe ever comes up again, I'll choose you, every time, without hesitation. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. That's not fair to whoever needs the promise kept. I don't care. I spent months thinking I could balance it all, thinking I was noble enough, clever enough to save everyone. And all I did was hurt the person who mattered most. His voice was fierce. Never again. You come first. Always. Sebastian, I mean it, Eleanor. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. I'm done trying to be a hero at your expense. Eleanor searched his face and saw the truth there, raw and absolute. He meant every word. And somehow, that terrified her more than the looters had, because it meant the decision was entirely hers now. Stay or go. Forgive or walk away. Build something new or let it all crumble. No more excuses. No more hiding behind his mistakes. Just her choice and all the weight that came with it. I need to clean up, she said finally, stepping back. I'm getting water everywhere. Sebastian looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded. I'll make tea and send word to the police about the salon. Thank you. Eleanor climbed the stairs to the bedroom she hadn't seen in weeks. It looked the same, immaculate, untouched, waiting. Like her marriage, like everything she'd left behind. She stripped off her wet clothes, washed her face, changed into dry things, caught sight of herself in the mirror and stopped. She looked different, older maybe, or just more real. Less like a woman playing at strength, and more like someone who'd actually earned it. Downstairs, she found Sebastian in the sitting room, true to his word with tea prepared. But he wasn't alone. Vivian's solicitor, a stern man named Barclay, sat across from him, papers spread on the table between them. Both men stood when Eleanor entered. Mrs. Ashcroft, Barclay said, I apologize for the intrusion, but we have a situation. Eleanor's stomach sank. What kind of situation? Garrett's moved up his deadline. He wants proof of ownership by tomorrow morning, or he's filing suit. Tomorrow? Eleanor looked at Sebastian. That's impossible. I know. Did you tell him about our offer, the buyback? I tried. He's refusing to negotiate. He wants vindication, not compensation. Sebastian's jaw was tight. We're out of options. Tof? Eleanor sank into the nearest chair, her mind racing. Everything they'd worked for, everything she'd just committed to sacrificing, was about to collapse because one man wanted to prove he'd been wronged. There has to be something, she said. Some legal mechanism, There isn't, Barclay said bluntly. Not in the time we have, unless... He stopped. Eleanor looked up sharply. Unless what? Barclay exchanged a glance with Sebastian. Unless we give him exactly what he wants. Which is an admission, public acknowledgement that he was defrauded, an apology from the Ashcroft family, But that would expose Marcus's crimes, Eleanor said. It would destroy Vivian's reputation, her son's future. Yes, Barclay agreed. It would. Silence fell. Sebastian stood abruptly, crossed to the window. No, absolutely not. I gave my word. I'm not breaking it now. Not when Vivian's dying. Not when… What if she releases you? Eleanor asked quietly. Sebastian turned. What? What if Vivian agrees? What if she decides that her son's reputation matters less than his financial security? She'd never… We could ask. Eleanor stood. It's her choice, Sebastian. Not yours. Not anymore. Sebastian stared at her. You're serious, Oz. I'm exhausted and terrified, and I almost died tonight, so yes, I'm absolutely serious. Eleanor moved closer. You made a promise to protect her. Fine, you've kept it. But at some point, she needs to decide what she actually wants protected, her pride or her child's future. Barclay cleared his throat. Mrs. Ashcroft has a point. Lady Hale is a rational woman. If we explain the situation… She's dying, Sebastian said harshly. She has weeks left, maybe days. And you want me to walk into her sick room and ask her to sacrifice the one thing she's been fighting to preserve? I want you to give her the choice, Eleanor corrected. There's a difference. Sebastian turned back to the window, his shoulders rigid. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Barclay, who gathered his papers quietly. I'll return tomorrow morning, the solicitor said. Early. Whatever you decide, we'll need to move quickly. After he left, Eleanor and Sebastian stood in silence. I can't do it, Sebastian said finally. I can't ask her. Then I will. He spun around. Eleanor, you gave your word. I didn't. Eleanor's voice was steady. If this is what needs to happen, let me be the one to carry it. You've been carrying everything else. It's not your burden. Yes, it is. I made it mine when I offered to help, when I decided to sell the salon, when I chose to be your partner instead of just your wife. She moved to stand beside him. Let me do this, please. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Tomorrow, Eleanor said. First thing, I'll go to Vivian and explain everything. And whatever she decides, we honor it. And if she says no, then we find another way, or we accept that some fights can't be won. Eleanor took his hand. But we do it together. Sebastian's fingers tightened around hers. Together. They stood like that as the rain continued outside, the fire burned low, and somewhere across the city, a dying woman lay awake, unaware that her peace and her child's future now rested on a choice she'd have to make by dawn. Eleanor didn't sleep. She lay beside Sebastian in the bed they'd once shared, the first time in weeks, but neither of them touched. They stayed on opposite sides of the mattress, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. When dawn broke gray and cold, Eleanor was already dressed. Sebastian found her in the kitchen, staring at untouched tea. You don't have to do this, he said. Eleanor looked up. Yes, I do. I could come with you, Sus. No, this needs to be between her and me. Eleanor stood, pulled on her coat. If you're there, she'll see your face and refuse out of guilt. But if it's just me, a stranger asking for hard truth, maybe she'll be honest about what she really wants. Sebastian looked miserable. What if she says no? Then we'll deal with it. Eleanor buttoned her coat with steady hands. But Sebastian, whatever happens today, we need to accept it. No more carrying impossible burdens alone. No more promises we can't keep. Just honesty, even when it hurts. He crossed to her, cupped her face briefly. When did you become the brave one? I've always been brave. I just needed a reason to prove it. The drive to Vivian's townhouse took 20 minutes. Eleanor spent them rehearsing what she'd say, discarding speeches that sounded too rehearsed, too manipulative, too cold. By the time the car stopped, she'd settled on simply telling the truth. The maid who answered looked exhausted. Mrs. Ashcroft, Lady Hale isn't receiving this morning. She had a difficult night. I know, I'm sorry, but this can't wait. Eleanor stepped forward. 5 minutes, that's all I need. Yes. The maid hesitated, then nodded. I'll ask. Eleanor waited in the foyer, studying the walls. Family portraits hung in careful arrangement. Vivian's late husband, stern and scholarly. A younger Vivian, bright-eyed and hopeful. And a small boy with his mother's eyes and his father's serious expression, the child at the center of all this. "She'll see you," the maid said, returning. But, please, don't tire her too much." "Yeah." Vivian's bedroom was on the ground floor now, Eleanor realized. Too weak to manage stairs. The room was dim, curtains drawn, the air thick with the smell of medicine and something else, the particular scent of a body slowly shutting down. Vivian sat propped against pillows, skeletal and pale. But her eyes were alert when Eleanor entered. "Mrs. Ashcroft, this is unexpected." Eleanor pulled a chair close to the bed. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest, even if the truth is ugly." Vivian's mouth quirked. "I'm dying. I don't have energy left for pretty lies." "Good." Eleanor took a breath. "Garrett's moved up his deadline. We have until noon today to provide proof of ownership, or he files suit. And if he does that, everything unravels. Every transfer, every settlement. Your son loses everything." Vivian's expression didn't change. "I'm aware. Mr. Barkley sent word last night. Then you know we're out of options. I assumed your husband would find another way. He's been remarkably resourceful so far." "There is no other way," Eleanor said bluntly. "Garrett doesn't want money. He wants vindication. He wants someone from the Ashcroft family to publicly admit he was defrauded, to apologize, to make it official record." Vivian went very still. "That would expose the forgery." "Yes. The scandal would destroy my reputation, my husband's memory. My son would grow up knowing," her voice faltered, "knowing his father was robbed by criminals and his mother was too weak to fight back. Or," Eleanor said quietly, "he'd grow up knowing his mother made a hard choice to protect his future, that she sacrificed pride for security, that she was strong enough to accept an ugly truth if it meant he'd be safe." Vivian stared at her. "You're asking me to choose. I'm asking you to decide what matters more, your reputation or your son's inheritance. That's not fair." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It's not, but it's the choice you have." Vivian's hands trembled on the bed covers. "Richard died trying to prevent exactly this. He made your husband promise." "Richard's dead, and his promise didn't account for Garrett being unreasonable. It didn't account for the world changing. It didn't account for the fact that sometimes protecting one thing means sacrificing another." Eleanor leaned forward. "Your husband wanted to protect you, but you're dying, Vivian, and your son is alive. Which one of those futures actually matters?" Vivian's face crumpled. "You're cruel." "I'm honest, there's a difference." "Is there?" Vivian's voice was bitter. "You come into my sick room and demand I choose between my dignity and my child's security, and you call that honesty?" "Yes, because pretending you have other options is the real cruelty." Eleanor's voice softened. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to give you the truth Sebastian was too kind to say. He'll keep his promise until it destroys him, until it destroys everything. But you can release him. You can make the choice he can't." Vivian closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her wasted cheeks. "If I agree," she whispered, "what happens?" "We go to Garrett this morning. Sebastian makes a formal statement admitting his brother defrauded you. The family apologizes publicly. Garrett gets his vindication. And in exchange, he drops the suit and the transfer stand. And my son? Keeps his inheritance, grows up secure, maybe hears rumors about his family, but he's protected financially. That's the best we can offer." Vivian was quiet for a long time. Eleanor waited, fighting the urge to fill the silence with more arguments, more persuasion. Finally, Vivian opened her eyes. "Your husband loves you very much." Eleanor blinked at the non sequitur. "I know. Do you? Because I've watched him destroy himself trying to keep a promise to a dead man. But the moment you were in danger, the moment you walked into that salon and he realized he might lose you, all of his noble intentions crumbled." Vivian's gaze was sharp despite her weakness. "He would have let me and my son fall into ruin if it meant keeping you safe. Did you know that?" Eleanor's throat tightened. "He told me something similar last night." And what did you say? I told him that wasn't fair. Life isn't fair, Mrs. Ashcroft. Marriage isn't fair. Love certainly isn't. Vivian's smile was faint and sad, but it's real, and it's worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for. She paused. Even worth sacrificing pride for. Eleanor waited. Tell your husband I release him from his promise, Vivian said quietly. Tell him to do whatever needs to be done to protect my son. And tell him, her voice broke. Tell him thank you. For trying. For caring. For being the kind of man who keeps promises even when it costs him everything. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. I will. One more thing. Yes? When my son is old enough to understand, tell him his mother chose him over everything else, including her pride. So, I promise, Eleanor said. Vivian smiled. Good. Now go. You don't have much time. Eleanor stood, then impulsively leaned down and kissed Vivian's forehead. The older woman's skin was paper-thin and fever-warm. You're braver than you think, Eleanor whispered. So are you, Vivian replied. Eleanor left quickly before the tears could fall in earnest. Sebastian was waiting in the car outside, pacing the sidewalk despite the drizzle. When he saw Eleanor emerge, he rushed forward. Well, she agreed. Eleanor's voice was steady. She released you from the promise. We can go to Garrett. Sebastian's legs seemed to buckle. He caught himself against the car, breathing hard. Sebastian? I thought... He stopped, swallowed. I thought she'd refuse. I thought this would end with everything destroyed, and it would be my fault for making a promise I couldn't keep. It's not destroyed. She chose her son, just like you would choose me. Eleanor touched his arm. Now we need to move. Barclay's meeting us at Garrett's office in an hour. The drive across the city was tense and silent. Eleanor watched buildings pass, her mind already working through what came next. The statement, the apology, the careful dance of giving Garrett what he wanted without giving him ammunition for further demands. Garrett's office was in a prosperous district, all brass and mahogany and masculine certainty. The man himself was in his 50s, gray-haired and stern, with the expression of someone who enjoyed being proven right. Barclay was already there, papers prepared. He stood when Eleanor and Sebastian entered. Mr. Garrett, may I present Mr. and Mrs. Ashcroft? Garrett didn't stand. I wasn't aware Mrs. Ashcroft had any involvement in this matter. She does now, Eleanor said crisply, taking the seat across from him without waiting for invitation. Sebastian sat beside her, and she could feel the tension radiating from him. I've prepared a statement, Barclay said, sliding papers across the desk. It acknowledges that Marcus Ashcroft engaged in fraudulent property transfers that affected Mr. Garrett's purchase. It offers formal apology on behalf of the Ashcroft family, and it proposes settlement terms. Garrett read slowly, his expression unchanging. When he finished, he looked up at Sebastian. This admits your brother was a criminal. Yes, Sebastian said. It will become public record. Yes. Your family's reputation will suffer. Yes. Garrett's eyes narrowed. Why the sudden cooperation? Yesterday you were stonewalling. Today you're offering everything I asked for. What changed? Affigt. Eleanor spoke before Sebastian could. Lady Hale is dying. She has weeks left, maybe less, and she decided her son's future matters more than her pride. So she released my husband from his promise to protect her reputation. How convenient. How honest, Eleanor corrected. Mr. Garrett, I understand you feel wronged. You were wronged. Marcus Ashcroft was a liar and a cheat, and you got caught in the aftermath of his crimes. But he's dead, and the only people left to punish are a dying woman and her child. Is that really the vindication you want? Garrett leaned back in his chair, studying her. You're very passionate about defending a family that's not your own. I'm defending what's right. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I sit, you're asking me to settle for an apology when I could have the full weight of the courts behind me. You could, Eleanor agreed, and you'd win. Eventually, after months of litigation, public spectacle, and legal fees. after dragging a dying woman through depositions and destroying a child's inheritance in the process. You'd get your vindication, and it would cost you more than you'd gain. Garrett's jaw tightened. You're assuming I care about the cost. I'm assuming you're a reasonable man who wants justice, not revenge. They're not always different things. No, Eleanor said quietly, but one of them lets you sleep at night, and the other doesn't. Silence fell. Garrett studied the papers again, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked at Sebastian. I want to hear it from you, in your own words. What your brother did. Sebastian met his gaze steadily. Marcus forged documents to sell property he didn't own. He defrauded you and several others. He was a criminal, and I'm ashamed to share his name. If he were alive, I'd see him prosecuted, but he's not, and the only people his crimes can hurt now are innocents. Lady Hale's husband knew what Marcus was doing. He was complicit. No, Sebastian said firmly. Richard Hale was a victim. He trusted my brother and was betrayed. He spent his last months trying to fix what Marcus destroyed. He died protecting his family from scandal he didn't cause. And you continued that protection. Yes, because he asked me to, because it was the right thing to do. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up a pen and signed the settlement papers. I'll accept the apology and the terms, on one condition. Eleanor's stomach clenched. What condition? I want assurance that Lady Hale's son will be educated properly, that he'll grow up knowing the truth, all of it, when he's old enough to understand. I won't have him believing his fortune came from honest means when it didn't. Agreed, Sebastian said immediately. Garrett slid the papers across the desk. Then we're done. The suit is withdrawn. The transfers stand. Eleanor felt the tension drain from her shoulders. Beside her, Sebastian exhaled shakily. Thank you, Eleanor said. Garrett's expression didn't soften. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because a child shouldn't pay for his father's association with your family's criminal. He stood. But Mrs. Ashcroft. Yes? Your husband's lucky to have you. Most women would have walked away from this mess. Most women aren't married to men worth fighting for, Eleanor replied. Something shifted in Garrett's face. Not quite approval, but close. Fair enough. They left his office in stunned silence. Only when they reached the street did Sebastian stop, turn to Eleanor, and pull her into a fierce embrace. You did it, he said against her hair. You saved everything. We did it, Eleanor corrected. Together. Sebastian pulled back, his eyes bright. I need to tell Vivian. She needs to know it's over. I'll go with you. They drove to Vivian's townhouse and were shown immediately to her room. She was awake, propped against pillows, looking somehow smaller than she had that morning. It's done, Sebastian said from the doorway. Garrett accepted the settlement. Your son's inheritance is secure. Vivian's face collapsed with relief. Thank you both. We should be thanking you, Eleanor said, moving to sit beside the bed. You made the hardest choice of all. No. The hardest choice was letting you walk into my mess in the first place. Vivian looked at Sebastian. I'm sorry. For all of it. For putting you in an impossible position. For nearly destroying your marriage. Stop, Sebastian said gently. You didn't destroy anything. I did that myself, but Eleanor helped me fix it. Vivian smiled faintly. She's remarkable. I know. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. I should check on the preparations. Make sure the formal apology goes out correctly. Eleanor, Sebastian started, I'll just be in the hall. She slipped out, giving them privacy. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, feeling the full weight of the past 2 days settle on her shoulders. It was over. The crisis resolved. The impossible choice made and accepted. And she was still standing, still married, still herself. The door opened. Sebastian emerged, his eyes red, but his expression lighter than she'd seen it in months. She wants to see you again, he said, before we go. Eleanor returned to find Vivian holding a small wooden box. This was Richard's, Vivian said. His father's before that. It's been in his family for generations. She held it out to Eleanor. I want you to have it. Vivian, I can't. Please. As thanks. As apology. As Vivian's voice wavered. As a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tell the truth, even when it costs us everything. Eleanor accepted the box with shaking hands. Inside was a simple silver compass, tarnished with age. Richard used to say that marriage is like navigation, Vivian said softly. Sometimes you know exactly where you're going. Sometimes you're lost. But as long as you have something to orient by, you can find your way back. She touched the compass gently. Let this be your orientation, truth, even when it hurts. Eleanor felt tears spill over. I'll treasure it. Good. Vivian leaned back against the pillows, exhausted. Now go home, both of you, and build something worth keeping. So they left quietly. In the car, Eleanor turned the compass over in her hands, feeling its weight. She's going to die soon, Eleanor said. I know. And we're going to have to tell her son someday about all of this. Yes. Eleanor looked at Sebastian. Are you ready for that? No, but I'll do it anyway, because it's the right thing. He reached over, took her hand. With you beside me, if you'll stay. Eleanor twined her fingers through his. I'm staying, not because I've forgiven everything, not because it's all fixed, but because I choose this. I choose you. I choose the messy, complicated, imperfect truth of our marriage. Sebastian brought her hand to his lips. That's more than I deserve. Probably, but I'm giving it to you anyway. They drove home in the kind of silence that felt like peace. When they arrived, Eleanor noticed something different immediately. The salon. Someone had boarded up the broken windows, swept the glass, left a note tacked to the door. Eleanor got out of the car and walked over, Sebastian following. The note was from Clara. Mrs. Ashcroft, we heard about the damage. The staff pooled our resources and made temporary repairs. We'll keep the place running until you decide what to do with it. You built this for us. The least we can do is protect it for you? See. Eleanor stared at the note, her throat tight. You don't have to sell, Sebastian said quietly. We'll find another way to handle Garrett's settlement. I can... No. Eleanor folded the note carefully. I meant what I said. The salon served its purpose. But I'm ready for something new. What will you do? Eleanor looked at the building, her first real achievement, her proof that she could build something from nothing. Then she looked at Sebastian, at the man she'd chosen to rebuild with. I don't know yet, she said honestly. But I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Sebastian smiled. Together. Together, Eleanor agreed. They returned home to find a letter waiting. Eleanor recognized Vivian's solicitor's seal and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a brief note and a legal document. The note read, Lady Hale passed peacefully this afternoon. She wanted you to know she died grateful and at peace. The enclosed is her final request. The document was a codicil to Vivian's will. In it, she'd left a substantial sum to Eleanor personally, not to Sebastian, not to the Ashcroft family, to Eleanor. For the woman who taught me that courage means choosing truth over comfort. Use this to build something beautiful. V. Eleanor sat down hard, the paper shaking in her hands. What is it? Sebastian asked. She handed him the document, watched his face as he read, saw the moment comprehension hit. She left you everything she had liquid, he said hoarsely. That's... Eleanor, that's enough to start over. To do anything you want. Eleanor took the paper back, studied the numbers. Eleanor took. Vivian was right. It was enough. Enough to buy independence. Enough to walk away if she chose. Enough to build an entire new life without needing anyone. She looked at Sebastian, at the man who'd made terrible choices and owned them, who'd learned and changed and was still trying, at the marriage they'd nearly destroyed and were slowly rebuilding. I know what I want to do with it, she said. What? I want to create a fund for women whose husbands die and leave them with nothing, for children who lose their fathers and need protection. Eleanor's voice grew stronger. I want to build something that prevents other Vivians from having to make impossible choices, something that gives them options instead of just survival. Sebastian stared at her. That's extraordinary. That's necessary. Eleanor stood, feeling something settle into place inside her chest. Vivian gave me this because she recognized something in me, and I'm going to honor that by making sure other women don't have to beg for help the way she did. You'll need help, legal advice, financial management, then you'll help me, if you want to. Sebastian crossed to her, took her hands. I want nothing more. Eleanor looked up at him. This doesn't mean everything's perfect between us. We still have work to do, trust to rebuild, patterns to break. I know, and I'm keeping the cottage in my name, always. Good. You should. And you're never keeping secrets from me again, ever, even if you think it's for my protection. Never, Sebastian promised. Even if it means fighting, even if it means you're angry, I'll tell you everything. Eleanor searched his face and saw the truth there. Imperfect, complicated, real truth. Okay, she said. Okay. She kissed him then, properly, for the first time since that day in the cottage garden. It felt different now, less like a test and more like a beginning. When they pulled apart, Sebastian's eyes were bright. We're going to be all right, he said. Eventually, Eleanor agreed. Not today, maybe not next week, but eventually. That's enough for me. Eleanor smiled. Yeah, me too, she. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm. Somewhere, a child was growing up, who would someday learn his mother had chosen his future over her pride. Somewhere, women were struggling alone with burdens they shouldn't have to carry. But here, in this house that had witnessed both fracture and healing, two people stood together and chose to keep building. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. And for now, that was enough. And for now, that was enough. The weeks that followed were not easy. Eleanor had expected them to be difficult. Rebuilding trust never was. But she hadn't anticipated the small grinding work of it. The moments when Sebastian would start to answer a question vaguely, catch himself, and force out the full truth instead. The times Eleanor would feel the urge to retreat to the cottage, to claim she needed space when what she really wanted was to test whether he'd fight for her or let her go. They were learning a new language together, and neither of them was fluent yet. The salon sold within 3 weeks. A consortium of Eleanor's former employees pooled resources with an investor Clara had found, and the deal was finalized on a gray Tuesday morning. Eleanor signed the papers in Barclay's office, her hand steady despite the finality of it. You're sure about this? The solicitor asked, watching her face. Completely. It's a significant asset to walk away from. I'm not walking away, I'm redirecting. Eleanor set down the pen. There's a difference. She took half the proceeds and established the fund exactly as she'd told Sebastian she would. The Hale Foundation, named for Vivian and Richard both, would provide financial assistance and legal support to widows and orphans left vulnerable by sudden loss. Eleanor threw herself into the work with a ferocity that surprised even her, drafting bylaws, interviewing solicitors, establishing criteria. Sebastian helped where she'd let him, but he'd learned to ask first rather than assume. Do you want my opinion on the trust structure, he'd say? Or would you rather work it out yourself? The first few times Eleanor had bristled at the question. It felt performative, like he was checking boxes rather than genuinely changing. But gradually, she came to recognize it for what it was. Actual effort. Actual change. The hard, unglamorous work of becoming a different kind of partner. I want your opinion, she'd answer. But I want you to know I might disagree. Fair enough. They argued more than they ever had before. Sharp, honest arguments that left them both frustrated and exhausted. But they were real arguments, not the careful, polite disagreements of their early marriage. Eleanor discovered she preferred the honesty, even when it stung. One night, 6 weeks after Vivian's death, they fought about the cottage. Sebastian had suggested carefully, diplomatically, that perhaps Eleanor might consider selling it. The upkeep was expensive. She rarely used it anymore. The money could go toward the foundation. Eleanor had rounded on him immediately. No, I'm just saying. I know what you're saying, and the answer is no. That cottage stays mine. Eleanor, I'm not trying to control it, aren't you? Because it sounds like you're trying to convince me to give up the one thing that's entirely mine. The one place I can go that has nothing to do with you or our marriage or any of this. Sebastian had gone very still. Is that what you think I'm doing? I don't know, is it? The silence stretched between them, taut and dangerous. Then Sebastian said quietly, I think the cottage scares me. Eleanor blinked. What? It scares me. Because it represents your ability to leave, your independence, the fact that you don't need me. He met her eyes, and part of me wants to eliminate that, to make you dependent again, so I can feel secure. Eleanor sat down slowly. That's honest. You asked me to be honest. I did. She stopped, absorbing his words. I didn't expect you to admit something that ugly. It is ugly, but it's true. Sebastian sat across from her. And I'm telling you because I recognize it's wrong. Because I know that wanting you dependent is the same impulse that made me keep secrets, the same need to control that nearly destroyed us. Eleanor studied his face. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. The cottage is yours. It stays yours. And I'm going to learn to be comfortable with the fact that you can leave anytime you want. Quizás it cuentan. He paused. Even if it terrifies me. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. It terrifies me too. What does? Staying. Trusting that you won't make the same mistakes again. Trusting that I won't wake up one day and realize I've forgiven something I shouldn't have. She reached across the table, took his hand. But I'm doing it anyway. Because the alternative, walking away from something real because it's hard, that scares me more. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, both terrified, and both choosing to stay anyway. 2 months after Vivian's death, Eleanor received a visitor. The boy was 9 years old, solemn-faced and carefully dressed. His guardian, Vivian's sister, brought him to the Foundation's newly established office on a Wednesday afternoon. He wanted to meet you, the woman explained. He's been asking questions about his mother, about what happened at the end. Eleanor looked at the boy. Thomas, Vivian had called him, and saw his mother's eyes staring back at her. Hello, Thomas. Hello, Mrs. Ashcroft. His voice was steady, but his hands twisted together nervously. Aunt Margaret says you knew my mother, at the end. I did. Not for very long, but yes. Was she... He stopped, swallowed. Was she scared? Eleanor considered lying, offering comfort. Then she remembered Vivian's words. Tell him his mother chose him over everything else. Yes, Eleanor said honestly. She was scared. Dying is frightening, but she was also brave. Do you know why? Thomas shook his head. Because she made a very hard choice. Your mother had to decide between protecting her reputation, what people thought of her, and protecting your future. And she chose you, without hesitation. What kind of choice? Eleanor glanced at the aunt, who nodded permission. There were some problems with your inheritance, Eleanor said carefully. Legal problems that someone else had created. Your mother could have fought to keep the problems secret, but it would have cost you everything. So she chose to tell the truth instead, even though it was embarrassing, even though it meant people might think badly of your family. Thomas was quiet for a moment. People do think badly. I've heard the older boys at school talking. They say my family are thieves. Your family were victims, Eleanor corrected firmly. Someone stole from your father. Your mother spent her last months trying to fix what that person broke, and she succeeded. You have your inheritance because she was brave enough to make a hard choice. Mr. Ashcroft helped too, the aunt added. Your mother spoke very highly of him. Thomas looked at Eleanor. Is he your husband? Yes. Is he a good man? Eleanor smiled slightly. He's trying to be. That's all any of us can do, try to be good, even when it's hard. Thomas seemed to consider this. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. Mother left this for you. She told Aunt Margaret to give it to you when I was old enough to understand why. He handed it to Eleanor. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was Vivian's wedding ring. Eleanor's throat tightened. Thomas, I can't. This should be yours. For when you're older, to give to... Mother said you'd say that. Thomas's voice was matter of fact. She said to tell you it represents a promise, that you'd understand. Eleanor turned the ring over in her hands, simple gold, worn smooth with years of wear. Inside was an inscription, "Truth above all." She looked at Thomas, at this boy who'd lost both parents and was still standing straight and brave. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll treasure this. Will you tell me about her sometime? Things other people might not know?" "Yes, anytime you want." After they left, Eleanor sat alone in her office, holding Vivian's ring. She thought about promises kept and broken, about the cost of truth and the price of secrets, about a woman who died knowing her child was safe because someone had been brave enough to demand hard choices. She slipped the ring onto her right hand. It fit perfectly. That evening, she showed it to Sebastian. He stared at it for a long moment, then said hoarsely, "She really did forgive me. She did more than that. She trusted us to finish what she started." Eleanor twisted the ring on her finger. "Thomas asked if you were a good man." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you're trying to be." Sebastian's smile was faint and sad. "What did he say to that?" "Nothing. But I think he understood." Eleanor moved closer. "The Foundation's first case came in today." "Tell me." "A woman named Sarah. Her husband died 3 months ago. Left her with 2 children and debts she didn't know existed. The creditors are threatening to take the house." Eleanor pulled out the file she'd brought home. "She needs legal representation and financial counseling, maybe temporary housing assistance while we sort out the debts." Sebastian scanned the papers. "This is exactly what Vivian wanted." "I know." Eleanor took the file back. "I'm going to meet with her tomorrow, see what we can actually do." "Do you want me to come?" Eleanor considered, then shook her head. "Not this time. This needs to be between her and me, woman to woman." "All right. But Eleanor..." "Yes? I'm proud of you for building this, for making something meaningful from all that pain." Eleanor felt her eyes sting. "It's not just me. It's Vivian's legacy. Your brother's crimes led to this in a strange way. If none of that had happened, we might still be living a comfortable lie." Sebastian finished. "I know. Sometimes I wonder if that would have been easier." "Would it?" "No. Easier maybe, but not better." He touched her face gently. What we have now, it's harder and messier and more honest than what we had before, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." Eleanor leaned into his palm. "Even though I still keep the cottage?" "Especially because you keep the cottage. It means every day you're here, you're choosing to be. That's worth more than any security I could manufacture." They stood like that in the fading light, 2 people who'd learned the difference between comfort and truth, and chosen truth despite the cost. The Foundation grew faster than Eleanor had anticipated. Within 6 months, they'd helped 12 families. Within a year, 28. Eleanor hired staff. Careful, compassionate people who understood what it meant to be desperate and alone. She established partnerships with solicitors who'd work for reduced fees. She created a lending program that helped women start businesses or return to school. Sebastian supported from the sidelines, offering advice when asked, stepping back when not. He'd returned to managing his own business affairs, but with a new transparency that surprised his associates. When asked why he'd publicly acknowledged his brother's crimes, he answered simply, "Because it was the truth, and I'm done pretending truth is negotiable." The response from their social circle was mixed. Some people admired the honesty. Others whispered that Sebastian had brought shame on a good family name. Eleanor discovered she cared less than she'd expected about the latter group's opinion. "Let them talk," she told Sebastian when he fretted about a particularly vicious piece of gossip. Their approval was never worth having if it depended on lies. 2 years after Vivian's death, Eleanor stood in the Foundation's new building, a proper office with meeting rooms and a small library of legal resources. The opening ceremony was small and private, just staff and a few donors. Thomas was there, now 11, and already showing signs of his father's serious intelligence. He approached Eleanor as the gathering was winding down. "Mrs. Ashcroft?" "Yes, Thomas? I've been thinking about what you said, about my mother choosing me over her reputation." "What about it?" "I think I understand now. It wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about teaching me that doing the right thing matters more than what people think." He paused. Even when it's hard. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Your mother would be very proud to hear you say that. I hope so. Thomas looked around the office. All of this? It's because of her, isn't it? Partially. It's because of a lot of people making hard choices. Your mother, your father, my husband, me. Eleanor knelt to be at eye level with him. But yes, your mother's courage started something, and we're trying to honor that by helping others find their own courage. Thomas nodded solemnly. Then, unexpectedly, he hugged her. Eleanor held him, this boy who'd lost so much, and was still choosing to see meaning in it, and felt something settle in her chest. Not closure exactly. Grief and healing didn't work that neatly. But purpose. Continuation. The sense that suffering could be transformed into something that helped others suffer less. After Thomas and his aunt left, Sebastian found Eleanor standing alone in the main office, looking at the wall where they'd hung a simple plaque. The Hale Foundation. Truth above all. Vivian would have hated the attention, Sebastian said quietly. Probably, but she'd have loved knowing her son understood why she made the choices she did. Eleanor leaned against him. Do you ever regret it? The public admission? The scandal? Sometimes. When old friends cross the street to avoid me. When business associates make excuses not to work with an Ashcroft anymore. He paused. But then I come here and see what you've built. See the families you've helped. And I remember that reputation built on lies isn't worth protecting. We lost a lot. We gained more. Eleanor turned to look at him. Do you really believe that? Yes. Don't you? She considered the question seriously. They had lost things. Social standing, some friends, the comfortable certainty of their old life. But they'd gained honesty, partnership, the ability to look at each other without wondering what was being hidden. Yes, she said finally. I do. That night, lying in bed in the house they'd almost lost, Eleanor said, I want to tell you something. Sebastian turned to face her. I'm listening. I've been thinking about the cottage. His expression became carefully neutral. All right, I'm not selling it. I'm never selling it. But I want you to know, it doesn't represent the ability to leave anymore. What does it represent? The fact that I could leave, and I choose not to. Every single day. She took his hand. For a long time I needed it as an escape route. Proof that I had options. But now, it's just a place I love. That's mine. That reminds me I'm a whole person outside of being your wife. I want you to be a whole person. I know. And I am. Eleanor moved closer. But I'm also your wife, your partner, and I choose that, not because I'm dependent on you, not because I'm afraid of being alone, but because what we've built together, this messy, imperfect, honest thing, it's worth choosing. Sebastian's eyes were bright. I choose it too, every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. They kissed, and it still felt like a beginning rather than a return to something lost. Because they weren't returning to anything. They were building something entirely new. 5 years after that afternoon in the salon, Eleanor received an unexpected letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the return address made her pause. Garrett's office. She opened it carefully. Mrs. Ashcroft, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing because I believe I owe you an apology. When we settled the matter of your late brother-in-law's fraud, I was motivated primarily by anger and a desire for vindication. I saw your family as criminals who needed to be punished, and I was determined to extract that punishment regardless of who else might suffer. It's taken me several years to recognize that I was wrong. Not about the facts, Marcus Ashcroft did defraud me, but about my response. In my zeal for justice, I failed to see the human cost of my demands. Recently, my own daughter found herself widowed unexpectedly. She came to me in desperation, facing creditors and legal troubles she didn't understand. I didn't know where to turn. A colleague suggested the Hale Foundation. Your staff helped her, gave her legal advice, financial counseling, and most importantly, treated her with dignity when she felt most vulnerable. It was only later that I learned you had established the foundation, that you had taken Lady Hale's legacy and turned it into something that helps others. I write this to tell you that I was wrong about you and your husband. You were right. There is a difference between justice and revenge. And in my pursuit of the latter, I nearly prevented something beautiful from existing. My daughter is stable now, thanks to your foundation. And I am humbled. With sincere respect, J. Garrett Eleanor read the letter twice, then handed it to Sebastian. He read in silence, his expression shifting from surprise to something close to wonder. He apologized, Sebastian said. He did. I never expected, neither did I. Eleanor took the letter back, folded it carefully. But maybe that's the point. Maybe when we choose truth over comfort, we create space for other people to change their minds, to see things differently. Should we respond? Yes, thank him for his honesty. Tell him we're glad we could help his daughter. Eleanor paused. And maybe invite him to the Foundation's anniversary gala next month. Sebastian smiled. You're still surprising me. Good. I'd hate to become predictable. The anniversary gala was larger than Eleanor had intended. What started as a small celebration grew into a significant fundraising event, attended by donors, clients, and supporters. Eleanor wore a dress the color of deep wine and Vivian's ring on her right hand. Thomas was there, now 16 and already showing interest in studying law. He'd grown tall and serious, with his mother's eyes and his father's measured way of speaking. Mrs. Ashcroft, he said, approaching her during the reception. I wanted to tell you something. Of course. I've decided what I want to do after university. I want to work in legal reform. Specifically, reforming inheritance laws to better protect widows and children. He paused. Because of what happened to my mother. What she had to go through. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Thomas, she would be so proud. I hope so. But more than that, I hope I can help make sure other families don't face the same impossible choices. He glanced across the room to where Sebastian stood talking with donors. Mr. Ashcroft told me once that the best way to honor pain is to prevent others from experiencing it. I think he was right. He usually is. Eventually. Thomas smiled, a rare expression on his serious face. Will you tell me more about my mother sometime? I have memories, but they're fading. I'd like to know who she really was. Not just the dying woman everyone talks about, but the person she was before. I'd be honored, though I only knew her at the very end. That's all right. Sometimes the end tells you everything you need to know about how someone lived. Ichigo is... After he walked away, Eleanor stood alone for a moment, watching the crowd. Donors mingling with clients. Lawyers talking with mothers who'd been on the edge of ruin and were now stable. People from completely different worlds, brought together by the simple recognition that everyone deserves help when they're desperate. Sebastian found her there. Quite a turnout, he said. I know. I'm a bit overwhelmed. You should be proud. I am. But also terrified. What if we can't sustain this? What if the funding dries up? What if... Eleanor... Sebastian turned her to face him. We'll handle it. Together. Like we handle everything now. She looked at him. This man who'd made catastrophic mistakes and owned them. Who'd learned to be a different kind of partner. Who showed up every day and chose honesty even when it cost him. When did you get so wise? She asked. When I almost lost you. Turns out near catastrophe is an excellent teacher. Eleanor laughed, then kissed him quickly. Come on, we should mingle. They separated to work the room, but Eleanor found herself watching Sebastian throughout the evening, watching him talk to a young widow about her legal options, his manner patient and respectful, watching him listen to Thomas describe his academic plans, offering encouragement without condescension, watching him be the man he'd fought to become, rather than the man he'd been. Near the end of the evening, Garrett appeared. Eleanor hadn't been certain he'd actually come, but there he was, older, grayer, but with less anger in his face than she remembered. Mr. Garrett, I'm so glad you could join us. Mrs. Ashcroft, thank you for the invitation and for helping my daughter. How is she? Thriving. She started a small business, dressmaking. Your foundation helped her secure the initial loan. He paused. I never properly thanked you. You wrote a very gracious letter. That was thanks enough. Still, I wanted to say it in person. What you've built here, it's remarkable. It's necessary. There's a difference. Garrett smiled slightly. You said something similar to me once before, about doing what's right versus seeking revenge. I remember. I didn't believe you then. I thought you were just trying to protect your family's reputation. He looked around the room. But you were telling the truth about what mattered, about priorities. Assai. We all were, eventually. Eleanor gestured to where Sebastian stood. Would you like to say hello? I think he'd appreciate it. Garrett hesitated, then nodded. I think I would too. Eleanor watched them shake hands. These two men who'd been adversaries, now finding common ground in shared humility. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, more like recognition, the acknowledgement that everyone makes mistakes and everyone deserves the chance to learn from them. Later, after the guests had departed and the staff was cleaning up, Eleanor found herself alone in the main office again. She stood in front of Vivian's plaque, remembering that first conversation, remembering the fear in Vivian's eyes, the desperation in her voice, the impossible choice she'd had to make. Thank you, Eleanor said quietly to the empty room, for trusting me, for being brave, for teaching me what it means to choose truth, even when it costs everything. The plaque didn't answer, of course, but Eleanor felt Vivian's presence anyway, in the walls of this building, in the work they did here, in every family they helped find their footing. Sebastian appeared in the doorway. Ready to go home? Almost. Eleanor turned to face him. I was just thinking about Vivian, about how much has changed since that day. Everything changed. Are you glad? Sebastian crossed to her, took her hands. I'm grateful. There's a difference. I'm not glad Vivian died. I'm not glad we went through hell, but I'm grateful we came out the other side as better people, as better partners. We're still not perfect. No, but we're honest, and that's worth more than perfect. Eleanor smiled. When did you become such a philosopher? When I married a woman who wouldn't settle for anything less than truth. They left the building together, arms linked, walking into the cool evening. The city spread before them, familiar and changed, like everything else in their lives. In the car, Eleanor said, I want to go to the cottage this weekend. Sebastian glanced at her. All right. I want you to come with me. He looked surprised. You usually go alone. I know, but I think it's time to share it, to stop treating it like an escape route and start treating it like a place we both love. She paused. If you want to, I'd like that very much. They drove home through streets lit by gas lamps, past buildings both grand and humble, through a city that had witnessed their near destruction and their slow rebuilding. When they arrived home, Eleanor noticed something different. On the wall near the staircase, someone, Sebastian, she assumed, had hung a small frame. Inside was a child's drawing, preserved carefully behind glass. Eleanor moved closer to examine it. The drawing was simple, almost abstract, stick figures holding hands, a house with a crooked chimney, flowers that looked more like explosions of color than actual blooms. In the corner, in careful block letters, for Mrs. Ashcroft, thank you. Sarah. Their first case. The woman with 2 children and impossible debts. The foundation had helped her stabilize, find work, keep her house. And apparently, her child had drawn this. When did this arrive? Eleanor asked. Yesterday. I thought you'd want to see it when you got home. Eleanor stared at the drawing, feeling something swell in her chest. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't sophisticated, but it was real. Evidence that what they were doing mattered, that their choices, the hard ones, the honest ones, the ones that had cost them so much, were making a difference. It's perfect, she whispered. Sebastian came to stand beside her. It's crooked, and the proportions are all wrong. I said perfect, not flawless. There's a difference. He smiled, understanding. Yes, there is. They stood there together, looking at this imperfect, beautiful thing, evidence of a life saved, a family stabilized, a child given a future. This is what it's all for, Eleanor said quietly. Not grand gestures, not public recognition, just this. Knowing we helped someone who needed it. Vivian would approve. Yes, she would. Eleanor turned away from the drawing, faced her husband in the soft lamplight. I forgive you. Sebastian went very still. What? For the secrets, for the exclusion, for everything that happened. Eleanor's voice was steady. I'm not saying it didn't hurt. I'm not saying it was right. But I forgive you, completely. Sebastian's eyes glistened. Eleanor, and I need you to forgive me too. For running, for hiding, for being so proud I almost let us destroy something worth saving. There's nothing to forgive. Yeats. There is. I made mistakes too. Different ones, but mistakes nonetheless. She took his hands. So we forgive each other. And we move forward. Not forgetting, but not letting the past define everything either. Sebastian pulled her close, pressing his face into her hair. I love you. I don't say it enough. You show it. That's better. They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd survived catastrophe and come out stronger for it. Not unchanged. Change was inevitable. But better. More honest. More real. That night, Eleanor dreamed of Vivian. In the dream, they were in the cottage garden, sitting in the sunshine. Vivian looked healthy and whole, the way Eleanor imagined she must have looked before illness consumed her. You did well, Vivian said. We're trying. That's all any of us can do. Try, choose, keep choosing, even when it's hard. I miss you, which is strange because I barely knew you. Vivian smiled. You knew what mattered. Sometimes that's enough. Your son is going to do great things because of you. Because of you too. You showed him what it means to turn pain into purpose. Eleanor felt tears on her face. I don't know if I'm doing this right. The foundation, the marriage, any of it. No one does, but you're doing it honestly. That's what counts. When Eleanor woke, dawn was breaking. Sebastian still slept beside her, his face peaceful in the gray light. She watched him for a moment, this imperfect man she'd chosen and chosen again, then slipped out of bed. In the kitchen, she made coffee and stood at the window, watching the city wake. Somewhere out there, women were struggling, children were afraid, families were facing impossible choices. But now, there was help available. Not perfect help, not always enough help, but something. A foundation built on truth and funded by sacrifice. A legacy that would outlive all of them. Eleanor touched Vivian's ring on her finger, feeling its solid weight. Truth above all, she whispered to the empty kitchen. I promise. And in that moment, standing in her house with her sleeping husband upstairs and her work waiting in the city, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in years. Complete. Not because everything was perfect, not because all wounds were healed, not because the future was certain, but because she'd chosen this life deliberately, had fought for it, had sacrificed for it, had built it stone by stone from the rubble of what almost was. She'd kept the cottage, her symbol of independence, her escape route, her reminder that she was whole on her own. But she'd also kept her marriage, rebuilt it into something stronger than what they'd started with. She'd kept both, because both mattered, because she was large enough to contain multitudes, independent and partnered, strong and vulnerable, certain and still learning. When Sebastian came downstairs an hour later, he found her at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. Foundation work? He asked. New applications. 3 more families need help. He poured himself coffee, sat across from her. Can we manage it? We'll have to. That's what we're here for. Sebastian studied her face. You look different this morning. How? At peace. Eleanor considered this. Maybe I am, finally. What changed? Nothing. Everything. She smiled. I stopped waiting for perfect and started accepting real. And real is enough? Real is everything. They sat together in the morning light, partners in the truest sense, and planned how they'd help the families who needed them. It wasn't glamorous work, it wasn't easy work, but it was work that mattered. And in the end, that was all either of them had ever wanted. To matter, to help. To be honest, even when honesty cost them. To choose truth above all, and to keep choosing it day after day for the rest of their imperfect, beautiful, real lives together.